Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're heading into some pretty uncharted territory. Shamanism in Silicon Valley.
Oh, wow. Shamanism and Silicon Valley. Those two don't usually go together.
You'd think so, right?
Right.
But that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. We're basing it on a YouTube video about this guy, John Rasmussen. He's a shaman. But get this. His journey actually started in the heart of Silicon Valley.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How does someone go from coding to, well, communing with spirits?
That's the million-dollar question. And to answer it, we have to rewind a bit, all the way back to John's childhood.
Gotcha. So what was his childhood like? Anything that hinted at this future path?
Well, from a very young age, John had these really intense experiences, like near-death experiences, even out-of-body experiences. Can you imagine that as a kid?
Whoa. That's pretty heavy stuff for a young mind to process.
Totally. He even remembers thinking during one out-of-body experience, who's that lying in bed? It's like he was already getting glimpses beyond the everyday reality we're used to.
Sounds like he was wired a bit differently from the start, but he didn't exactly go straight into shamanism after those experiences, right?
No, not at first. Instead, he went down a more conventional path.
So did he try to just ignore these experiences and blend in?
I think it was more like trying to find a balance. He got a degree in electrical engineering, worked in high-tech, classic Silicon Valley stuff. But deep down, that pull toward the spiritual never really went away.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like having this whole other dimension calling out to you.
Exactly. So on top of his tech career, he was also exploring all these different spiritual practices, martial arts, energy healing. He even traveled to China to work with healers. It was almost like leading a double life.
Wow, talk about a busy schedule. But all this searching led him somewhere, right?
It did. To a pivotal moment that really set him on the shamanic path. It happened during a session with an energy healer. They were working through some personal stuff. And out of the blue, the healer says, you're a mediator of souls between the worlds.
Wow, that's a pretty loaded statement.
Right. And neither of them really knew what to make of it at the time. It was just this cryptic message that kind of hung in the air.
So did it make sense to John right away, or was it more like a seed that needed time to grow?
More like a seed, for sure. He kind of brushed it off, went back to his life. But then, 3 years later, something amazing happens. John decides to attend a workshop led by this well-known shaman, Dr. Alberto Velogo.
Okay, I'm sensing a connection here.
You got it. First thing Velodo says to the group, a shaman is just a mediator of souls between the worlds.
No way. Talk about a sign from the universe.
Right. It was like that message had been echoing through his life, waiting for him to finally hear it. And get this, he almost didn't even go to that workshop. He snagged the last spot right before it started.
It's like destiny had other plans. So after that, I imagine things started falling into place.
You'd think so. But even with this validation, John still wrestled with the idea of being a shaman. He thought, how can I, a tech guy from California, be a shaman?
It's funny how we get stuck on these stereotypes about who a shaman should be, where they should live.
Totally. We picture someone in a remote village, living in a hut, not someone working in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But John's story challenges all that.
Yeah, it shows that these abilities can surface anywhere. So how did he move past those doubts?
Well, Villacota's workshop wasn't just about lectures. There were a bunch of practical exercises, too. And during those exercises, John started tapping into these incredible abilities, seeing people's energies, even past experiences, with this incredible clarity.
He must have been freaking out a little.
He totally was. He thought he was making it all up.
I can only imagine. It's one thing to hear about these abilities, but experiencing them firsthand is a whole other story.
Right. It's like suddenly seeing the world in a completely different light. And Villacota, with his years of experience, helped him trust what he was seeing.
That's crucial, having that guidance and support from someone who's been there. So did John just jump right into being a shaman after the workshop?
Not quite. It was more like a gradual process. He started practicing these techniques on his own, but then he made a pretty big decision.
Okay, what did he do?
He enrolled in Villacato's Four Winds training program, which meant traveling to Peru and working with the Quero shamans high in the Andes.
Wow, from Silicon Valley to the Andes, that's a leap.
A huge leap. But it was also a crucial turning point in his journey. It wasn't just about learning techniques, it was about personal healing, too.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, right? Clearing your own baggage so you don't project it onto others.
Exactly. You wouldn't want a surgeon operating on you if their hands were shaky, would you? So how did this training, all the healing work, how did it manifest in his practice?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. He started working with psychologists and psychiatrists, helping patients who weren't finding relief through traditional therapies. And there's this one case that really highlights what shamanic work can do.
Oh, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So he was working with this young woman struggling with really bad depression. Nothing seemed to be helping. But through his shamanic work, John discovered that she was being influenced by the spirit of her deceased uncle.
Wait, her uncle's spirit? Are you saying her depression was being caused by an external energy?
That's the perspective shamanism offers. It suggests that our mental and emotional states can be affected by energies or entities that we might not even be aware of.
That's a pretty wild concept. So how do you even address something like that?
The work then becomes about helping both the person and the attached spirit to heal and move on.
So it wasn't just about treating the woman's depression, but also helping her uncle's spirit find peace.
Exactly. And it seems that by helping the uncle, the young woman was finally able to break free from her depression.
That's incredible. But it also raises so many questions. How do shamans even do this work? How do they see and interact with these energies?
I know, right? It's mind-blowing stuff. And John himself says he sees things that haven't even been captured in Hollywood movies.
I'm dying to hear more about these techniques, but I think it's the perfect place to take a break and come back for part 2 of our deep dive. All right, so before the break, we were talking about some pretty mind-blowing stuff, like John helping that young woman by working with her deceased uncle's spirit. But I'm still kind of stuck on how he actually does this work. Like he mentioned something called soul retrieval, right? What exactly is that?
Yeah, soul retrieval is a big deal in a lot of shamanic traditions. It's based on this idea that when we go through trauma or even just really intense emotional experiences, parts of our soul, our essence, can actually kind of fragment.
So it's like pieces of ourselves can get lost or detached. I
Yeah.
thought that was just like a metaphor.
It's a metaphor, yeah, but in shamanism, it's also taken quite literally. And those lost fragments, they can lead to all sorts of problems, like feeling empty, disconnected, not whole. And that's where soul retrieval comes in. The shaman actually journeys to other realms, kind of like a spiritual search and rescue, to bring those pieces back.
So they're literally going to other dimensions to collect these soul bits. But like how do they bring back something physical?
Not usually, no. It's more about bringing back symbolic representations of what was lost, like, say, strengths, talents, things that were kind of forgotten or buried.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's
Yeah.
like those pieces act as a reminder of who we truly are, even the parts we've lost touch with.
Exactly. And it's not always obvious what those symbols mean. Remember that story John told about the young guy grieving his friend? The symbol John saw for him was a karaoke machine.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Seemed kind of random at the time.
Right. But for that guy, it represented the joy and creativity he'd shared with his friend, through music. And by bringing that symbol back, it helped him reconnect with that part of himself.
I get it. So it's not like a literal piece of soul is being returned, but something that can help that person reconnect with what's missing. But how would someone even know if they were missing soul parts in the first place? Are there like signs?
Oh, yeah, there can be. It might show up as that feeling of emptiness we talked about. Or maybe addictions, getting sick a lot, self-sabotage even. Basically anything that keeps you from feeling whole and happy.
Okay, but is there like proof that this works? I mean, does science back up any of this soul retrieval stuff?
Well, there's not a ton of research on soul retrieval specifically,
Mm-hmm.
but there are studies that look at shamanic practices more broadly, especially for things like trauma. And some researchers think soul retrieval might have parallels to things like inner child work in psychology, where you're trying to integrate different parts of yourself.
Interesting. So it's like acknowledging that we all have these different aspects or parts inside us. And healing comes from bringing them together, making them whole. But are there any risks with soul retrieval? I mean, John was big on shamans doing their own healing work, but is there any danger for the client?
That's a good question. Like any kind of therapy, it's important to find someone skilled and trustworthy. I mean, one risk is that it could bring up past trauma if it's not done carefully. And it's not a quick fix either. Soul retrieval is just one part of it, You still got to put in the work to integrate those retrieved aspects.
Right. So it's not like you get your soul bits back and boom, everything's perfect. Makes sense. It's more like a jump start, but then you got to keep going on your own.
Exactly. And that's what shamanism is all about, personal responsibility. The shaman is there to guide you, but ultimately, you got to do the work. Speaking of which, we talked about John seeing people's true nature, the good and the bad. He said one of the hardest things was learning not to judge, even when people weren't at their best.
That's got to be tough, especially when you're seeing things most people don't.
Totally. But that non-judgmental stance is so important in any kind of healing work, especially this kind. It's about recognizing that everyone's on their own path with their own struggles. Instead of trying to change them, it's about creating a space for them to heal on their own terms. And this brings us to something else John talked about, shadow work.
Oh, yeah, he mentioned that as a big part of shamanic training. But I gotta be honest, it sounds a bit scary.
I know, right? The name kind of conjures up images of lurking in the darkness or something, but it's really not about that.
So I don't have to, like, become a goth to do shadow work.
No, not at all. It's more about acknowledging the parts of ourselves we've rejected, the ones we consider bad or unworthy. Like those embarrassing memories, the negative thoughts, the impulses we try to hide from. Carl Jung called this the shadow.
So it's all the stuff we try to keep hidden, even from ourselves sometimes.
Hmm.
But why do we need to bring it into the light? I mean, isn't it better to just keep those things buried?
Well, the thing is, those shadow aspects don't just disappear because we ignore them. They can actually have a huge impact on our lives, even if we're not aware of it.
So by trying to be good and denying those parts, we might actually be giving them more power.
Kinda, yeah. It's like the more we resist, the stronger they get. So shadow work is about facing those parts head on, accepting them as part of who we are.
I get that it could be liberating, but it also sounds really uncomfortable. Like digging up all that stuff. No thanks.
It can be tough, yeah. But working with someone who knows what they're doing, like a therapist, can make a huge difference. And the thing is, those negative qualities, often they have a positive side too if we can learn to see it.
So it's about finding a balance, not erasing those parts completely, but figuring out how to use their energy in a healthier way.
Exactly. Like anger, for example. It can be destructive, sure, but it can also be a powerful force for setting boundaries and protecting ourselves. Same with fear, it can paralyze us, but it can also motivate us to step outside our comfort zones and grow.
Okay, yeah, I see how that fits in with the whole non-judgment thing we were talking about earlier. It's about accepting all parts of ourselves, the messy ones too. But how does this shadow work actually happen?
Well, it starts with becoming aware of the patterns that keep repeating in our lives, the ways we get in our own way, the judgments we have about ourselves and others.
So it's like noticing those self-sabotaging behaviors, the negative self-talk, and asking, why am I doing this to myself?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And then digging a little deeper, where did those behaviors come from? Often they stem from beliefs we formed early on, maybe from childhood experiences, things people told us, things like, I'm not good enough, or I'll never be loved, or I'm a failure. Those kinds of limiting beliefs can really mess us up.
No kidding. It's amazing how much those early experiences can stick with us.
They really do. But here's where it gets really interesting. John also talks about the influence of past lives, like literally seeing back in time to identify patterns that might be carrying over into someone's present life.
Wait, past lives. Are we going full-on reincarnation here?
That's definitely part of the shamanic worldview. The idea is that our soul carries all those experiences with it, and sometimes those experiences create patterns that keep repeating until we learn from them.
It's like we're haunted by our own past, even if we don't consciously remember it.
Haunted might not be the right word, but yeah, the past can definitely influence us in ways we don't always realize. And the goal is to understand those patterns and break free from them.
Okay, but how does John actually access those past life memories? Does he, like, hypnotize people or something?
It's not hypnosis in the traditional sense. It's more about helping people reach a deeper state of consciousness, a state where those memories and patterns can surface.
He did say he sometimes sees those past lives playing out like a movie in his head. But how does seeing those past lives actually help people in the present?
Well, it can give them a deeper understanding of where their current problems might be coming from, what karmic baggage they might be carrying, like that example John gave about the person who was so hard on themselves, full of guilt.
Oh,
Right, the one where they were still unconsciously punishing themselves for something they'd done in a past life, even though they had no memory of it.
wild, right. And just by addressing those past life patterns, John helped that person find some peace and self-acceptance. It's amazing how powerful those unseen connections can be.
It really is. It shows how shamanic work can heal not just our present selves, but also help us break free from the past. Which makes me think, what about the downsides of being a shaman? I mean, working with all this heavy stuff, being tuned in all the time, that's gotta be tough.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. Like, what are the challenges that come with this kind of work?
Well, one thing John talked about was this idea of balance. It's not easy being tuned in to the shamanic realms all the time while also living a normal life, especially in a place like Silicon Valley where there's already so much going on, so much energy flying around.
Yeah, he mentioned feeling overwhelmed in crowded places, like picking up on everyone's emotions and stuff. That would be exhausting.
Totally. It's like your senses are turned way up all the time. So learning to manage those energetic boundaries, knowing when to switch off, that's crucial for shamans.
I remember him talking about a technique called the kahuna break to disconnect from that constant flow of energy. What's that all about?
It's a kind of ritual from the Hawaiian tradition. It involves visualization, breath work, hand gestures, all designed to create a shield, a temporary barrier to prevent energetic overload.
So like a mental off switch for all that intense input.
Yeah, basically. And it's not just for shamans either. Anyone who's sensitive to energies can benefit from grounding and protection practices.
Makes sense. We could all use a little energetic protection sometimes, especially with how crazy the world can feel. But besides all the energy stuff, are there other challenges for modern shamans?
Definitely. Like John talked about this misconception that shamans are perfect, you know? Like they've transcended all human flaws and lived these blissful, enlightened lives.
Right, the whole wise guru on the mountaintop image. It's easy to romanticize it.
It is. But John's trying to make it clear that shamans are still human. They have the same emotions, the same struggles, the same temptations as anyone else.
So they get angry, get sad, make mistakes, just like us regular folks.
Exactly. And that's why the shadow work is so important. You know, it's about acknowledging those parts, integrating them, not pretending they don't exist.
So even shamans have their own shadows to wrestle with. Makes them a lot more relatable, for sure.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that they're not these distant, otherworldly beings. They're just people who've chosen this path of healing and transformation for themselves and for others.
This is really making me rethink what it means to be a shaman. It's not just about the abilities, it's a whole way of being in the world, of seeing things differently.
You got it. It's a way of perceiving reality, connecting with something bigger than ourselves. And speaking of that, John also talked about the importance of being an ordinary person.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. Isn't being a shaman kind of the opposite of ordinary?
It's easy to think that, right? Like, you got to be some kind of special, chosen one to do this work. But John's saying it's not about putting yourself above others or trying to be someone you're not. It's about embracing your humanity, all of it, the good and the bad.
So it's not about escaping the ordinary world to become a shaman. It's about bringing those two worlds together, finding that balance.
Exactly. And that's where the real magic happens, I think. Bringing the wisdom and insights of shamanism into our everyday lives.
Okay, but how do we do that? It's not like we can all just run off to Peru and train with the shamans.
Right. It's not about copying John's path exactly, but there are ways to tap into those same abilities to find that shamanic potential within ourselves. And that's something we'll talk more about after the break.
Okay, so how do we find that shamanic potential? Do we all have to become, like, professional shamans?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, John did say that one of the key things about psychics, you know, people who are really intuitive, is that they learn to trust those gut feelings. So maybe that's a good place to start for the rest of us, too.
So pay more attention to those moments when you just kind of know something, even if it doesn't make sense logically.
Exactly. That's your intuition trying to tell you something. Maybe you get a weird feeling about a person or a situation, or suddenly you have this flash of insight seemingly out of nowhere. Those are the moments to pay attention to trust that inner voice. The more you do that, the stronger it gets. Like a muscle you're training.
Okay, so intuition, check. Anything else we can do to kind of tap into those abilities?
Dreams. Our dreams are like a direct line to our subconscious, and there's a ton of wisdom hidden there. Pay attention to what your dreams are telling you.
I do have some pretty crazy dreams sometimes. Maybe I should start writing them down.
That's a great idea. Keeping a dream journal can be super helpful. Just jot down anything you remember as soon as you wake up, even if it doesn't make sense at the time. Look for patterns, recurring symbols, any strong emotions that come up. You never know what insights you might uncover.
Intuition, dreams. What about those shamanic journeys we talked about earlier? The ones where John travels to other realms. Can regular people learn to do that too?
You know, there are actually a lot of techniques for reaching those altered states of consciousness, for accessing those deeper realms. Some people use drumming, chanting, guided visualizations, even specific breathing exercises. These can all help shift your awareness and open up those connections to the unseen world.
Interesting. It sounds like there are a lot of different ways to explore those spaces. What about plant medicines? John mentioned working with shamans who use those as part of their practice. Is that something you'd recommend?
Plant medicines can definitely be powerful tools for spiritual exploration and healing, but they're not for everyone, and it's super important to approach them with a lot of respect and caution. I mean, ideally, you'd be working with an experienced guide, someone who knows what they're doing, and of course, making sure the medicines are ethically sourced and all that. It's not something to just jump into lightly.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like a powerful experience, but maybe not for the faint of heart. But it seems like there are plenty of other ways to explore those deeper realms, even without plant medicines.
Totally. And remember, it's not just about our inner world either. John also talked about how important it is to connect with nature, to spend time in the natural world.
Yeah, that makes sense considering he spent so much time in the mountains and jungles of Peru.
Nature has this incredible power to heal and to teach us. It helps us get grounded, to feel the rhythms of life, to connect with that sense of interconnectedness that's so essential to shamanism.
So even something as simple as going for a walk in the park can be a form of shamanic practice.
Absolutely. The key is to really be present, to pay attention to your surroundings. Notice the sights, the sounds, the smells, how the air feels on your skin. Feel the earth beneath your feet. Let yourself really soak it all in.
So it's about being mindful, appreciating the beauty and the energy of the natural world.
Yeah. And as you deepen that connection, you might start to notice things you hadn't before. Maybe a sense of peace washes over you, or you see an animal that seems to have a special message just for you. Those are all signs that you're opening up to that deeper level of awareness.
This is starting to sound less like becoming a shaman and more like just living a more mindful and intentional life.
And that's exactly what it is. Shamanism isn't about a title or a role, it's about a way of being. It's about bringing that shamanic consciousness into everything we do.
So it's about bringing those insights, that way of perceiving the world, into our everyday lives.
Totally. It's about seeing the magic in the ordinary, recognizing the sacred in everything around us, and using our gifts to make the world a better place, even in small ways.
This deep dive into John Rasmussen's world has really changed my perspective on shamanism. It's not what I expected, but it's definitely something I want to explore more.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? They're not just about information. They're about sparking our curiosity, helping us see things in new ways, and maybe even inspiring us to tap into our own hidden potential.
John's story has definitely given me a lot to think about. Maybe we all have a bit of that shamanic spark inside us, just waiting to be ignited. Thanks for joining me on this fascinating journey. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep listening to those whispers of intuition.